know what she said, she might just change your life.
Sharon Caddy and Kate Wheeler in studio, and now it is time for The Legal Beat with Neuberger Partners LLP, plain talk about legal, liberty, and social justice issues that impact all Canadians. What we need to know and want to talk about today. We are joined in studio by Joseph Neuberger. Good to see you, sir.
Nice to see you too.
Well, we started the show talking to an expert about terrorism, and we're going to end talking about Charlie Sheen,
Yes, we
which is
are.
apparently inflicting his own form
Another form of
terrorism
Yeah.
across the world. Now, and what we're hearing today, after he revealed one of the worst kept secrets in Hollywood, apparently, that he was HIV positive. Now, Gloria Allred is saying that she has been approached by some of his exes to, file lawsuits against him, and she's not even sure where it's going to go, because I think if that was somebody that I think extortion, I think he's got the possibility of the people that have trying to extort him for money to keep the secret. Now that's over and done with, but there's all kinds of lawsuits that can happen. But when it comes to being HIV positive in Canada,
Yes.
can you be charged, and what can you be charged with if you know you have HIV, have sex, and don't tell?
Yeah, there was a landmark decision in 2012 by the Supreme Court of Canada, which came from two cases from different parts of the country. And essentially what the Supreme Court of Canada said is that for individuals who are HIV positive, if they use protection like a condom and have low viral loads, then they do not need to disclose.
Really?
But if those two conditions are not met, then they have a positive obligation to disclose. Now, if they don't disclose, and unfortunately they have high viral loads or they're not using protection, then that essentially negates consent in a sexual act, and they are at risk of being charged with sexual assault, aggravated sexual assault, and other factors, because the Supreme Court of Canada has determined that the transmission or possible transmission of that virus can cause serious bodily harm. So it's serious, and this type of issue has been criminalized in Canada.
Okay, so let's just explain again. We did discuss this the other day, but if you weren't listening, and Charlie Sheen said that he had a low viral load. That means it is undetectable. The HIV is undetectable in the blood.
Yeah.
But the problem is it can still be in genital fluids, and it can vary. And apparently, he uses lambskin condoms, and they don't protect you. So you have to be very careful about what you're saying. But is this just for HIV, or what if you have a sexually transmissible disease like herpes? Would that
Well, it
apply?
doesn't apply the same in the criminal context, but there are rules and regulations with respect to, in the health profession, about disclosure of if there's a patient who has certain sexual transmitted diseases, if there's certain circumstances in which disclosure has to be made. But it's not criminalized like HIV, because still without a cure, it's determined to be a disease that can cause death, although the treatments now are excellent, and in most, if not all cases, the viral loads are extremely low and undetectable. But it's not the same. It's not treated the same under the criminal law.
Okay. So then, in this case, a couple of women have said that he never told them, but he's saying one was his former goddess, Brie Olson, who went on, and the porn star, and she went on and saying, he never told me, and then Sheen's manager came out yesterday and said, because by the time you guys had split up, he hadn't been diagnosed.
Yeah, and
so,
that's right.
He didn't know. How could he tell you if he didn't know?
Right, and that's an issue, because there still has to be intent.
Right.
So in any civil lawsuit or a criminal prosecution, you still need to establish that the person had knowledge of the disease which they had, and therefore intentionally did not disclose. So if he truly did not know, and he wasn't suffering any symptoms at the time that would have given him significant concerns about having contracted the illness, then that can very well be a defense. I just didn't know, and it's terrible that I didn't, but I didn't know, and therefore he would not be necessarily liable or would be able to be prosecuted, for example, under Canadian law.
Well, these must be relatively tricky cases for the lawyer, because in many of these cases this would be definitely he said, she said in a contained environment. And how do you even begin?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of cases are based upon witness statements and he said, she said.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge. But, you know, there may be some scientific evidence that you could look at to assist in that regard. And you look at the overall dynamic. There's, you know, it depends on the individual. I mean, if it's a one-off, so if it's just one partner, you know, and the person saying, I didn't know, I hadn't been tested, then you're probably looking at a situation where maybe they're telling the truth. When you have multiple partners, and there are some extreme cases that have been in the Canadian context, then you're looking at an individual who really has been actively out engaging in activity and maybe doing it on purpose. There could be other scenarios where people are just engaged in multiple sexual partners and still don't know, and you know, that may very well be true, so they'll have to testify and be cross-examined on it. But it's a bit tricky. Fortunately, you know, overall we haven't had very many of these prosecutions. There were since 1998, when originally one of the laws came out. There's been about 130 prosecutions, maybe a bit more, but overall, fortunately, there haven't been
In
too many.
Canada?
In Canada,
In Canada? I'm surprised there've been that many.
Yeah, but I think since 2012, which is this decision from the Supreme Court of Canada, we don't have very many, and most people are extremely responsible with their health and are respectful with their partners' you know, bodily integrity and their own health, and you know, that's an important thing, because we all have to look after our own health and other people's health if we're engaged that way. So I think that's a good sign.
So what would, okay, so say I had been in a relationship with somebody and I didn't know, and I found out and I traced it back, I found out that I was then HIV positive and I traced it back to that person.
Yeah.
What do I do? Do I go to the police? Do I have
No.
them charged? No?
Well, no, you could certainly contact that person and then advise them of the circumstance. There's no reason to go to the police, because in your mind you didn't know at that time, so you're doing the right thing to get back in touch with the person and let them know what the truth is and what the reality
No,
was
I meant
at the
if
time.
I contracted it.
Oh, if
from
you contracted
somebody. Yeah,
it.
like how do I then get some sort of restitution or alert like the rest of the world?
Well, okay, so you were with a partner at a specific
Yes,
time,
I contracted HIV.
and you think you contracted it from that person. Well, in those circumstances, you may go to the police and launch a complaint. You may hire a lawyer and pursue the individual civilly. You could also go to the health department as well and register a concern and a complaint there, because there may be other people who this person was in contact with. So there are multiple areas where you would go. But certainly one option is to go to the police and say, here's what happened to me. I didn't know. The person didn't tell me. And unfortunately, I've contracted this illness. It's serious.
Yeah, well, it is serious, although it is manageable. It is serious. And, you know, and again, I'm glad that you said that there is a distinction. It's not that something like herpes is not criminalized. But again, that would be something that you would report to the health department, I would say, because that is a transmissible disease.
Sure, and there are other diseases that, you know, can cause severe liver damage and blood infections and other things. So, I mean, there are, you know, rules and guidelines in place with respect to disclosure. And you know, rather than, you know, we have this habit always of criminalizing social issues and health issues, and we understand why that has to happen sometimes. But the reality is education and promoting for people to get tested and to be open and honest with their partners and future partners is really the best way to handle this. But there are dangers from other illnesses as well, not just HIV.
Absolutely. All right, let's put that aside and let's go back to the other war on terror. And there is, we have seen in Toronto and across Canada some assaults, specifically in Toronto, an unprovoked attack on a Muslim woman picking up her children near an elementary school that she used to go to because she was in fact born and raised in Toronto. And the attack came 2 days after the mosque in Peterborough, Ontario, was set ablaze, all in the aftermath of last week's terrorist attacks in Paris.
Right.
So, I mean, the two men who attacked this woman hurled slurs that were like bigoted. They said, you know, go home. It's like she lived around the corner. She was
She
born
was
around the
home.
corner. She was home. What do we do about these hateful and cowardly acts? Like, what, where
Well,
can we take this?
Unfortunately, these things do happen,
Absolutely.
and you're dealing with individuals who are not typical. You're dealing with people who would be committing crimes maybe in other respects anyways. So, a law-abiding Canadian citizen wouldn't just act out to destroy a place of worship or assault and injure a human being simply because of their race, color, or religion. But it does seem that this is hate-motivated, because it is a crime that's committed on an individual not because of something they've done, but because of who they are. And so these crimes have to be investigated from the perspective of a hate crime. And we need to look at this in the larger sense, too, because these types of acts can become very divisive in a community. And the reality is, when you're facing that type of terrorism, which has gone on in Beirut and in Paris, etc., what the terrorists want to do is create the division in these countries like Canada and the United States and Europe, where they draw the line between the communities, and that's the way they're going to generate more recruitment for their own cause. So we have to take these crimes very seriously, and we have to educate our communities on what's important for us to stand together, and also make sure that we have sufficient information going to our public so that they feel safe and don't have any desires to act out in ways that they shouldn't.
So legally, with these two men, they're charged. What would be the difference between it being called a hate crime and just assault?
Well, a hate crime is a serious aggravating factor. So this person suffered minor injuries, but let's say they would be charged with an assault or an assault bodily harm. It would be labeled a hate crime. And so that is an aggravating factor like other factors. So, for example, if an assault occurs within a family context, it's a domestic-related assault. So if it's in a person in a position of trust, that's an aggravating factor which can increase sentence. Similarly, a crime which is committed as a hate crime can attract a much more severe penalty than if it's just an assault where two people had gotten into an argument and beat each other up, or there was a random attack. So it's a serious aggravating factor which can increase the penalty.
So as a defense lawyer, what would you do if you had to defend these
I'd
people?
ask for a very high retainer.
Good start.
Look, let's say the case could, as a defense lawyer, your job is to defend your client.
Absolutely.
Period,
I was
regardless of the
wondering
offense.
what defense you could possibly put up in this case.
Well, first there's identification. So if they, if let's assume, for example, that the Crown could establish the case beyond a reasonable doubt. There's video of these people committing it. Identification's not an issue. It's clear that they've committed the assault. Then one of the steps you want to take is to try and mitigate the issue. And you might take your client and say, look, why did this happen? And maybe there's some counseling and therapy that you can send them to assist. Because some people may be acting, I'm not saying in this case, but some people may be acting irrationally. They may have other mental health issues. There may be other things that had gone on in life that sort of lent them to commit this type of act. So there are various models of therapy and counseling that they could go to and to address what their issues may be. And if they go through a course of some good therapy and counseling and take steps to take what we call restorative steps, a letter of apology, doing some community service, undergoing an assessment and therapy, that establishes to the court and to the person who has been hurt by this individual that they have taken steps to correct their behavior and they're trying to atone for it and give back to the community and apologize for it. And that's a healthy thing, because then the person is taking steps to try and rehabilitate themselves. And in the eyes of a court or a judge, when they're sentencing this individual, it's a far better circumstance than somebody who just doesn't do anything and says, forget it. But if you apologize and you recognize what you did was wrong and try and look at the root cause of why you did it and take steps to repair that, then you're a different person being sentenced by the judge than somebody who is, blatantly an offender and doesn't have any remorse for what they've done.
Click the channel subscribe button for full-length interviews and more from What She Said here on YouTube.